Okay, so today we are continuing to work on factoring. Again, factoring is the opposite of multiplying. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be factoring going from something like this, like a trinomial, like x squared plus 6x plus 8. And what we actually want to do is, instead of factoring out a GCF, the biggest number that divides the numbers, and the smallest exponent, is we're actually going to factor it into two separate binomials, kind of doing the opposite of doing the crab claw. So like this is going to end up being our answer, but it is, if I were to actually multiply out x plus 4 times x plus 2, I would get this x squared plus 6x plus 8. So we're going from a trinomial into like two parentheses that would be crab claw multiplied together. So with the first problem, all the first sets of problems on the top of your notes is going to be when my c value is positive. So when we name these, our c is going to be our constant, which is just our regular number. So in this case, it's going to be my positive 16 here. So off to the right-hand side, underline c is positive. What we're doing is we're going to be looking for two numbers. So we're going to have, our second step is going to be two parentheses. For today, x will always be the first number, and then what I'm looking for is to fill in the blank. So I'm looking for the number that will go into the second space of both the parentheses. So the two numbers that we're looking for will always be the same sign. So either they're both positive or both negative. So in this case, I'm going to look at these. I'm going to write notes above my c value, so I know that they are going to be same sign. And then the next step will tell me my next. So what I want to look for is I want to find two numbers that when I multiply them, I get our c value. So two numbers, multiply them, I get the c value, which in this case is 16. And then when we add them, we get our b value. And so, and again, the note kind of up to the top is I want them to be the same sign, and I want them to add to get me my b value, which is 8. So again, multiply to get my 16, and then add to get me 8. And so, again, if you don't know where to start with problems like these, you're going to list out all the different ways to multiply to get 16. So I've got 1 and 16, I've got 2 and 8, I've got 4 and 4. Pretty quickly, you should realize that this is going to be 4 and 4 because they multiply to get me 16 and they add to get me 8. So when I put them in here, I'm going to put I'm going to do it in blue. Put a 4 and a 4 in, and then all I have to do is figure out my sign. They're either both plus signs or both minus signs. The way that I'll figure out which one it is if I want them to add together to get me a positive 8, it's a plus 8 right there. If they were both negatives, they would add together to get me negative 4 or negative 8, so I know that they both have to be positive. Okay. Last step then is what I can do is this is all equal to 0, and so to actually solve my equation, what I can do is I can split this into two separate equations and solve. So what I'm going to do is I call this the arrow thing, is I'm drawing two arrows, and I'm going to make each parenthesis equal to 0. So I go x plus 4 is equal to 0, and x plus 4 is equal to 0. So in both these, I would subtract the 4 over to the other side to get x is equal to negative 4. Subtract the 4 to the other side, and x is equal to negative 4. This one just so happened to end up being the same number, but most of the time they will be two different numbers. So those would be my two answers, x is equal to negative 4, and x is equal to negative 4. The next three, again, same thing. Again, first thing I'm going to do is look at my c value. My c value is positive, so that tells me that they're going to be the same sign. And I want to add to get my b value, which in this case is negative 11. So again, I'm put my parentheses in there. X is my first number, and then I'm looking to fill in the blank with the second number. So all the different ways to multiply to get 10 are 10 and 1, 5 and 2. Again, which ones add to give me 11 are 10 and 1. So I can put in a 10 and a 1. And then just be careful, this is the one we usually struggle with, is I want them to add together to get me a negative 11. So I actually want these both to be negatives. Remember that they're the same sign, so it's either both positive or both negative. In this case, they're both negative. These are equal to 0. And so again, I can split this off into two separate equations. X minus 10 is equal to 0, and x minus 1 is equal to 0. So I can add the 10 to the other side and get x is equal to 10. The other equation, I can add the 1 to the other side and get x is equal to 1. Those are my two answers. The middle problem, same thing. Again, look at my c value. It is positive, so I know that means that they're going to be the same signs in my parentheses, and I want to add them together. So again, I put my parentheses. X is my first term, and then I'm looking to fill in the blank with a second term. I want them to add together to get me the 8x. So all the different ways to multiply to get 12 are 12 and 1, 4 and 3, and 6 and 2. 6 and 2 are going to be the combination that adds together to get me. Circle that. And then again, I want them to add together to get me a positive 8x, so I want them both to be positive numbers. So I split it up into two separate equations, doing the arrow thing. X plus 6 is equal to 0, and x plus 2 is equal to 0. So I can subtract the 6 in both my equations, get x is equal to negative 6. Oops, crap. Subtracted 2 in the second equation, my fault. And get x is equal to negative 2. Okay. And then the very last one, again, same thing. C value is still positive. That means same sign and add. I want them to add together to get me negative 17. And so when I go over here, again, I can list out all the different ways to multiply to get 60. And here I'm going to actually show you a shortcut. So sometimes we struggle with how to find all the factors. And so again, I want them to multiply to get me 60. And so what I can do is on my graphing calculator, to find all the factors of 60, I can hit my y equals button in the top left-hand corner. And whatever number I want to find the factors of, I can do that number. So in this case, we want to do 60, and then divided by x. And so then what I can do is I can go to my table. So I can hit second graph that gives me my table. And then I can go through here, and every single whole number ordered pair, or like x and y that are whole numbers, are going to be different ways of multiplying to get 60. And so again, I wanted them to add together to get me 17. And so right here, 5 and 12, they'll multiply to get me 16, and they add together to get me 17. So I want to use 12 and 5. And so here, again, I want to use 12 and 5 as my two numbers. My parentheses, x, fill in the blank with my 12 and my 5. And then again, I want them to add to get me negative 17, so I want them both to be negative. Split it off into two separate equations. X minus 12 is equal to 0. X minus 5 is equal to 0. So I add the 12 to the other side. Get x is equal to 12. Add the 5 to the other side, and x is equal to 5. My two separate answers. Okay? So again, this is just all of our c values being positive. So when we move on at the bottom, this is when my c values are negative. So again, my c value right here is my negative 8. So when c is negative, the two numbers that I'm looking for will always have different signs. So one's positive and one's negative. So I can go to my parentheses, and I can just go ahead and put in x plus and x minus, because I know that one's plus and one's minus. And then here's the one that's a little bit different, is the two numbers that I'm trying to find, I want them still to multiply to get my c value, so multiply to get me 8, but then I want them to subtract to get my b value. So the notes that I'm going to write myself up above my c value is diff for different signs, One's positive, one's negative. We already did that. And then sub, for now I want to subtract to find my two numbers. And so when I do this, again, all the different ways that multiply to get 8 are 8 and 1 and 4 and 2. The ones that have a difference, or when I subtract to get me 2, are 4 and 2. So when I fill in the blank here, I know one of them is going to be a 4 and one of them is going to be a 2. The only thing, so once I've chosen my numbers, I still have to remember that I still want them to actually add to get me -2. I know that's kind of weird because I just said we're subtracting. We subtract to find the pair of numbers that works, but we want them to add to get us a -2. And so when I put the numbers in there, I want to put one of them, 4 or 2, is going to be positive. One of them is going to be negative. And so for them to add together to get me -2, it's going to be a -4 and a +2. So you really have to be careful with where you're putting the numbers in. Once you find the right pair of numbers, you have to make sure you're putting them in the right spot, with the correct one being positive and negative. That's why this one where I have different signs, my C negative, it's a little more difficult. So again, just double check yourself. Take both of these numbers. -4 times +2 gives me 8. -4 plus +2 gives me -2. So I know I'm right. Then I can split it off into two separate equations. Go x plus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 4 is equal to 0. So I can subtract the 2 to the other side. X is equal to -2. Add the 4 to the other side, and x is equal to 4. It's the same thing. So go ahead and flip over to the back, up at the top. Again, just kind of doing these. These are all, again, first thing I always do is look at my C value. The C value is negative, so I know that means different and subtract. And so again, when I put my parentheses here, I know that I can already put down x plus and x minus. I want all the different numbers that multiply to get me 48. 48 and 1, 24 and 2. The one that's going to end up working is going to be 6 times 8. 6 times 8 gives me 48. It also has a difference of 2. And so again, I want them to add together to get -2 when I put them in their respective places. And so when I do that, I should get a -8 and a +6. So the 8 goes with the minus sign, and the 6 goes with the plus sign. One trick that you kind of have with this is that the bigger number, which in this case is 8, always goes with the sign of that when they're different, when they're two different signs. So the bigger number always has to go with the same sign as my B value, or that middle term. Then I can go ahead and I can split it up into two separate equations. X plus 6 is equal to 0. X minus 8 is equal to 0. Subtract the 6 to the other side and get x is equal to -6. Add the 8 to the other side and get x is equal to 8. With the second one, same thing. Look at the C value, different signs, and subtract. So the combination that's going to work is going to be 6 and 2. 6 times 2 gets me to 12, and then 6 minus 2 gets me to 4. And so again, I can put my two parentheses out there. One's a plus, one's a minus, I know that. And 6 and 2 are my pair that work. Again, my bigger number, which in this case is 6, is going to have the same sign, so I know that my 6 is going to be positive, and my 2 is going to be negative. So I get x plus 6 is equal to 0, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. So I get, subtract the 6, x is equal to -6, add the 2, x is equal to 2. And the last one here, again, C value is negative, so that means different signs and subtract. Plus and a minus sign. I want two numbers that multiply to get me 18 that have a difference of 3. This case, it's going to end up being 6 and 3. Again, If you don't know where to start, you always list out all your factors and find the pair that works. But 6 and 3 will multiply to get me 18. They also have a difference of 3. And so, again, the bigger number, which in this case is 6, is going to be the same sign. And so I'm going to put in there a positive 6 and a negative 3. Split it up. X plus 6 is equal to 0. X minus 3 is equal to 0. So I get x is equal to negative 6 by subtracting the 6 to the other side, and x is equal to 3 by adding the 3 to the other side. Just want to do maybe 2 of these really quickly. Let's do a middle one in that middle row. So again, or actually first, let's go ahead and do this one. Do the middle row all the way over to the right-hand side. So again, first thing that I always do is look at my C value. My C value in this case is a positive 72. So when it's positive, remember, that goes back to what we did first. That's going to be same signs, both positive or both negative, and then I'm adding to get my B value. Once I'm there, then I can go ahead and check. Again, same signs. I don't know quite yet whether they're going to both be positive or both be negative. List out all the different ways to multiply to get 72. Again, that'd probably be a good one to throw into our calculator, but 9 and 8 multiply to get me 72. They also add together to get 17. And then just be careful here. We want it to add together to get me a negative 17. So if I put the 9 and the 8 in there, if they were both positive, it would be positive 17. So I want them both to be minus signs. And then solve both of them. X minus 9 is equal to 0. X minus 8 is equal to 0. So x is equal to 9 by adding it to the other side. And then x is equal to 8 by adding it to the other side. Now let's go ahead and do this middle one in that middle row. Actually, you know what? Let's do the bottom left one, actually. With this one, again, I'm looking at my C value. That's going to mean different signs and subtract. Remember that different and subtract always go together. And then I want them to subtract to get me, careful, that's a 1. So a positive 1 in there. And so I can already put my parentheses with my signs, x plus and x minus. And then the 2 numbers that multiply to get me 42 that have a difference of 1 is going to end up being 7 and 6. 7 and 6 multiply to get me 42. When I subtract them, I get a 1. And then again, my bigger number, which is 7, has to have the same sign as my B value. So I want it to be a positive 7 and a negative 6. So x plus 7 is equal to 0, and x minus 6 is equal to 0. So I get x is equal to negative 7, and x is equal to 6.